I'm Eddie Muller. Welcome to Noir Alley. Our film this week has a special place in my personal history. It was more than 20 years ago that I programmed my inaugural festival devoted to film noir, and The Narrow Margin was the first movie I screened. This was in Hollywood at the legendary Egyptian Theater, Sid Grauman's second movie theater, but the first to be known as a movie palace. And what made the evening extra special was that our guests that night were the film's producer, Stanley Rubin, its director, Richard Fleischer, and its star, Marie Windsor. They reminisced about how The Narrow Margin, made in 1950 but not released until 1952, had been the breakthrough they were all looking for in Hollywood. Separately, Rubin and Fleischer had toiled for years in B units, and Windsor, once touted by MGM as the next Joan Crawford, had never had a part this fabulous, a true star-making turn. It was Stanley Rubin who fostered the project. He'd had an agreement with RKO to both write and produce the film Macau, but studio chief Howard Hughes pulled the rug out from under him. As a makeup, Rubin was given his pick of any B property in development at the studio. He chose an original story called Target by Martin Goldsmith and Jack Leonard. Now, noir fans might recognize Martin Goldsmith as the author of Detour, often described as the greatest B movie ever. Well, Stanley Rubin might argue that the film he produced from a Goldsmith story is even better. His first move, a smart one, was signing up director Dick Fleischer and his regular writing partner, Earl Felton. Rubin had been impressed by the string of exciting pictures these two had produced for RKO, brisk and bruising B films like Trapped and Armored Car Robbery. Under Rubin's stewardship, The Narrow Margin would be a cut above those films, a nervous A in industry lingo. This is also what's known as a can picture, a story taking place almost entirely within the confines of a moving vehicle. It can be a plane, a bus, a submarine. In this case, it's a train traveling from Chicago to Los Angeles. Among the passengers is a surly cop assigned to haul in a mobster's wife to testify in a racketeering case. Various parties, of course, want to make sure she never makes it to the coast. It only took Fleischer 13 days and a budget of $230,000, virtually all of it spent on RKO sets, to deliver a picture with as much style and inventiveness as any film of its time. But as brilliant as Fleischer's work is, the main event in The Narrow Margin is the face-off between two film noir heavyweights, granite-faced and gravel-voiced Charles McGraw and sultry and statuesque Marie Windsor. These two take hard-boiled to a whole nother level, slinging the sass as well as anybody ever.
What are you gonna do, shoot something for breakfast?
Sure, name it.
Eggs, bacon, toast, a bucket of coffee, and some cigarettes. I'm famished, Brown.
Okay, I'll share it with you. I don't want them counting trays. Here's some cigarettes.
McGraw had been acting in movies since the early 40s, routinely cast as a cop or a hoodlum. His career fully set sail on the black tide of noir that rose up in Hollywood after World War II. He played memorable hard cases in films such as The Killers, T-Men, and Border Incident. But it wasn't until The Narrow Margin that anyone had the inspired idea of letting McGraw take the lead, sticking him in virtually every scene. To say that he crushes it is entirely appropriate. Now, Marie Windsor traveled the distaff side of the same road, a Utah beauty queen who toiled in the trenches at MGM, the promise of starring roles always dangled but never delivered. Marie's problem, as she was told over and over again by agents and producers, was that she was too tall, too voluptuous, and just too damn sexy. She'd never be cast as anything but the other woman. Now, in truth, Marie never did have a role that genuinely challenged her as an actress. She could simply roll out of bed and be all the femme fatale you ever wanted. And it's in that mode she burned up the screen in two undisputed classics, The Killing, coming to Noir Alley later in the year, and The Narrow Margin. In time, Marie came to be known as the Queen of the Bees. And as she always said, with a rueful smile, it's nice to be queen of something. As you're about to see, The Narrow Margin has a lot of kinetic energy. It must have run in the Fleischer family's blood. Richard Fleischer's father, Max, and his brother Dave were the main rivals to Walt Disney, creating the animated classics Betty Boop and Popeye the Sailor. And Fleischer shows a similar knack for clever staging and fast-paced action. In The Narrow Margin, the direction of several scenes is nothing short of miraculous, given the time and budget constraints.
You look pretty. What have you been doing, falling off the train?
Director of photography George Discant deserves a carload of credit for rising to the challenges this production presented. When shooting wrapped, everyone involved knew they had made something special, including, unfortunately, studio boss Howard Hughes, who loved this film to a fault. But that's a story for after the film. Right now, it's time to get your ticket punched. Climb aboard for The Narrow Margin. Let me get this out of the way quickly. As much as I love The Narrow Margin, as much as I think it comes as close to B-movie nirvana as any film, it still vexes me that every time I watch it, I am waiting for the shot of Marie Windsor's body being carried off the train on a stretcher. Now, if I had a Noir Alley time machine, and believe me, we're working on it right over here in the elevator, there are a few things I would certainly use it for, to go back in time and correct. First, I'd go back and get Ricardo Montalban cast in Touch of Evil instead of Charlton Heston. And right after that, I'd drop in at Union Station and make sure that they get the moment where Charles McGraw watches Marie Windsor's body being carted past and whispers, "I don't even know her real name." How can that not be in the film? Okay, seriously. We're actually lucky The Narrow Margin exists at all. As I mentioned before the film, RKO studio chief Howard Hughes loved this movie. And when Howard Hughes loved something, that wasn't always a good thing. Producer Stanley Rubin was stunned when Hughes, only minutes after screening the film, asked how difficult would it be to reshoot all the scenes with Charles McGraw and Marie Windsor, replacing them with Robert Mitchum and Jane Russell, and then just insert that new footage into the existing film. Now, while Rubin and Richard Fleischer were crying over this development, Hughes drew up a 13-page dossier on everything in the movie that needed to be changed. As was his wont, Hughes envisioned a bigger, more exciting climax filled with cops and crooks skirmishing throughout and on top of the speeding train. There were also two things already in the finished film that Hughes couldn't tolerate. First, the big plot twist had to be eliminated. Marie Windsor had to actually be the mob boss's wife, and Jacqueline White, who's revealed to be the actual Mrs. Neal, would just be some dame on board with no real connection to the plot. Now, Hughes's rationale was that no gangster would ever marry a woman who looked like Jacqueline White. Seriously.
What would you say if I told you that I'm Mrs. Neal?
You are what?
I'm Frank Neal's widow, Mr. Brown. Now do you see what you've done?
You couldn't be.
The other big change involved McGraw's partner, played by Don Badeau, who gets killed early in the movie. In Fenton's original script, there's a devastating scene in which McGraw's do-right cop learns at the end of that knockdown, drag-out fistfight that his partner was on the take. He'd accepted a $10,000 bribe to turn Mrs. Neal over to the mob. Now, this was all shot and in the original cut, but Hughes demanded that this plot twist be eliminated. He'd allow no hint of police corruption in the film. So, 13 months after The Narrow Margin was completed, fill-in director William Cameron Menzies shot 19 new bits and pieces, more than 12 revised pages of script. And even after that, The Narrow Margin still sat on the shelf at RKO, unreleased. Fortunately, Dick Fleischer and Earl Felton came to the rescue. Specifically, they came to the rescue of another film that Hughes was threatening to sink, His Kind of Woman. John Farrow had finished the film, but Hughes still felt it needed just that something more. And what he demanded, of course, was precisely the slapdash Keystone Cops climax he'd tried to graft onto The Narrow Margin. Fleischer essentially ransomed The Narrow Margin by agreeing to salvage the third act of His Kind of Woman, in the process subjecting himself to months of Hughes's endless and insane tinkering. Fleischer recounts the whole crazy episode in his memoir, Just Tell Me When to Cry, and it's one of the funniest backstage tales ever, even if the director didn't find it particularly humorous at the time. Eventually, with his studio hemorrhaging money, Hughes turned The Narrow Margin loose, having maimed it only minimally. Released to critical acclaim in April 1952, the film would be a sleeper hit, one of the few RKO films to turn a profit that year. In the fall of 1952, Howard Hughes would sell his interest in the studio and withdraw from the movie business to devote himself full-time to being America's most famous filthy rich fruitcake. Can you imagine if Twitter had existed when Howard Hughes was alive? Meanwhile, Richard Fleischer, Stanley Rubin, and Marie Windsor all went on to maintain long, successful, and sane lives and careers. Now, speaking of Twitter, we've been known to do that once in a while in Noir Alley, as well as the Facebook thing. So jump on that train if you're so inclined. Next week, Noir Alley celebrates Mother's Day in time-honored tradition with a women in prison movie. And not just any women in prison movie, it's Caged, the mother of all women in prison movies. So get together with Mom, make her some popcorn, and let her know if she doesn't shape up, there's a cell waiting for her at the state pen.